a very short time, actually, we have become one of the most successful Democratic clubs in the greater St. Louis. We are, your membership dues has allowed us to advertise our speakers. And so we got to a very wide audience on Facebook. We had about 100 attendees. I think probably a lot of you attended our St. Louis County Township Town Hall. It was very lively and well attended. And we always are, we've become recognized as people ask, who are you going to have speak? So that's a nice reputation to have. But the exciting news is that for the first time ever, we can financially contribute to our candidates. The executive committee on Sunday approved a $500 donation to Missouri It Starts Today. If you haven't heard of Missouri It Starts Today, it's Michelle Hornish's. She runs that organization for Missouri. Their mission is to fund every Democratic candidate at the state level. So even the smaller people get much needed contributions. Donors, the way it works is you can sign up for just a couple of dollars a month and whatever you feel comfortable with on a recurring monthly donation. And then the money goes directly to the candidates with no minimum, no middleman in between. So that's a great thing. And so what I'm going to ask you, if you're not a member of Chesterfield Township Democrats, if you go to chesterfielddemocrats.org and select the tab on the top that says about membership, you can pay your $25 dues. And if you're a student or youth, it's only $10. And so your money is really being used well to promote our Democratic candidates and to promote Democrats in general as we go forward in this election. The next announcement I have is that Paul McCool has been our treasurer since the beginning and in 2017. Bob Pickard has generously volunteered for the treasurer position. And so Bob will be the deputy treasurer for the coming months and then become our treasurer. We look forward to welcoming him, and we are always looking for volunteers who may want to serve on the executive committee. We only meet once a month and we've gotten to know each other really well. It's a very rewarding experience to be putting together our meetings every month. Our level of engagement for the elections is vital. As you all know, you're probably getting a lot of emails. We need help, we need help. And so to that end, you will be getting a bi-monthly calendar of events that will be rolling, and then you will be able to find out exactly what's going on and decide, which candidate or which issue that you have a passion about and volunteer, because we really need this last push with less than 100 days out to the election. Last, our September 8th meeting will feature Yinka Folletti, candidate for Missouri Secretary of State. I actually saw him, he's running against John Ashcroft, who needs to be replaced. I saw him speak and I had no idea how important and how much influence the Secretary of State has for the state. And so I really encourage you to come, because you'll learn just why this issue is so important, and even to the wording on how ballot initiatives get onto the ballot is controlled by him. So we hope that you'll come for that. You'll be getting advertisements for that. So as customary, we invited candidates to make their 2-minute announcement. We're going to keep them to 2 minutes, because when they see that, they've got 30 seconds, and then we're going to pull the plug. We won't exactly pull the plug, but you'll know that your time is up. And so we've got several here that you can see, and we'll start with Deb Lavender, who is running for Missouri Senate seat 5 in Missouri.
Maureen, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity of being with you. I'm going to say Senate District 15. I'm running against Andy Koenig. That's all right. We are so excited. I'm going to, inside of my 2 minutes, tell you we do have some early polling that shows I'm ahead. And the really nice news is we know the Republicans have early polling as well that show he's behind. So we're excited by that opportunity to have a head start right now. We've been working hard for that. If you haven't, go to my Facebook, Deb Lavender, Deb Lavender for State Senate, and see that we've been sitting on corners with large signs that say Deb Lavender's running for State Senate. I'm walking the district, and we have video that we're putting up on there. So we, as everyone, have tremendous opportunities to volunteer. My team is out here talking right now about polling locations in November, so we're planning ahead for all of that. If you know people in the district who want yard signs, let us know. But we're very excited. The issues of healthcare. I've worked in the House for 6 years. I've always asked for Medicaid expansion. And now, having been a member of the Budget Committee, I know how to implement the expansion. And that's just so important for all of us to have somebody in Jeff City who knows how to implement it. My opponent has never voted to expand healthcare. He's advocated that we should not. The other that's going to be on the ballot in November is the Dirty Missouri, which is the opposite of Clean Missouri. My opponent has voted against that. My opponent right now has a special bill in the special session to say that it is okay for the Attorney General to take over for Kim Gardner. So there's just so many reasons that you want to elect me to this position. I appreciate your being with us tonight and on this call, and for all of the work that you do for so many of us, including all of the things that you do that none of us know about. I appreciate all of that time that you put in, the time that you take away from your families. We love having you with us. It's crucial that you're with us. And with that, Maureen, thank you very much for having me on tonight.
And I have to tell you, I was coming home on a Sunday, I think from wherever, and I saw Deb's people, and I had to swing around the corner. I said, I got to say hello. And they were getting honks and high fives as cars went by. It was so much fun. I actually stayed longer because I was so jazzed watching them get the acceptance. So you're
good. Come out and sit on the corner for us. It's a lot of,
I mean, it must be a lot of fun because there's a lot of positive reinforcement. So thank you, Deb.
Thanks, Maureen.
Now we'll go to Emily Luby. She is field organizer for Jill Shoup.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Emily Luby, and I'm one of 2 field organizers on Jill Shoup's congressional campaign. We have some exciting news. So our race was recently upgraded by the Cook Political Report from lean Republican to toss-up Democratic. So that's just such exciting news for all of us working on the campaign and volunteers that we have some tangible data to show that all of our hard work has been paying off. Today, we are officially on the airways with the 6-figure ad buy, so be on the lookout for Jill's introductory ad. And we had a really wonderful Get Out the Vote program last Monday. We sent about 11,000 texts and made about 1,000 GOTV calls. So we're just really trying to capitalize on our exciting primary turnout and on Medicaid expansion. I personally feel a lot of hope for November. And so we're just trying to build our volunteer capacity right now. But in terms of why Jill is running, I think most of you are familiar with her as a Missouri state senator, but she's really looking to build on her record in the state senate as someone that, brings common sense, practical solutions to problems facing Missouri families and working across the aisle to just build coalitions and to lower the cost of healthcare and make families' lives better in St. Louis. I look forward to your questions, and thanks, Maureen, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very exciting that Jill has just pushed this for anybody who worked on Court's campaign to come so close last year or in last election, and then to see that we're able to build on that momentum and really make this a real possibility this year. So it's very, very exciting. So anyway, thank you, Emily. Representative Trish Gumby, you were elected and you are my representative.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Maureen. Hi, Chesterfield Dems. Happy to be here this evening. It's a great day to be a Democrat, especially with news out of the Biden campaign. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also coming to you from Jeff City. I thought I would be in session tomorrow, but if you've seen the news, Senate Bill 1 is falling apart. That's a good thing. Going to committee next week and then back to the floor for us for debate around August 24th. So stay tuned. I will tell folks I was opposed to that bill. I am opposed to the bill. I encourage you to call your senators and reps and express your feelings around that, because I will tell you it matters. So every letter, every call, every social media post, it gets heard one way or the other. So thank you. Wherever you stand on anything, just be an engaged citizen. We are 84 days from November 3rd. What that looks like for me and my campaign is we got work to do. and we will be out in the district. I actually am door knocking, probably one of the few folks who may be doing that. We have tested that, socially distanced with masks, and it's been going well. So my opponent is doing that. I'm doing that as well. There are opportunities to volunteer, and there is always room for more money. So anything folks want to do in that regard, we have to do a lot of direct mail simply because of the virus and how that's affected us. So I just encourage you to support who you can. It's very much appreciated, and I look forward to celebrating all the wins on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. And now we've got Helena. She's no stranger to Chesterfield Township Dems. She's been coming for probably just since the beginning. Helena is running as candidate for District 100.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Helena Webb, state representative candidate for District 100, which includes about half of Chesterfield, maybe a third, and about half of Baldwin and Winchester, and one precinct in Town and Country. And yes, I did come to some of those early meetings in early 2017 and was glad to connect with you all. I am scattered across the district as I campaign, and I appreciate you always welcoming me with open arms whenever I'm able to show up. And yeah, so I am running to make sure that we keep more guns out of our schools, that we fight for reproductive freedom, and that we stop a lot of these bad votes that are happening in Jefferson City, and to make sure that there's some accountability to this office. My opponent, Derek Grier, he routinely bucks the vote of the people. He wants to overturn Clean Missouri, and it's not the only issue he's on the opposite side of the district with. They show up for progressive issues when they vote, and now we gotta get them to vote for a Democrat. So that's what I'm working on. And we are not knocking doors, but we are dropping literature at doors every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock for 90 minutes. We keep it short and sweet, about 75 minutes of walking and then just some announcements. And it's a really nice way to get to know the district, get to know the neighborhoods, and to spread the word. So I encourage you to go to helenawebformo.com. That's helenawebformo.com, and check me out. If you'd like to join us, please fill out a contact form and we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Helena. I look forward to seeing you on the 23rd for a lip drop.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, Connor Auchi he is our regional, whoops, sorry. Forgot that. I got to make that. Come on, turn off. There. Sorry. Connor Auchi is our regional organizing director at Show Me Change, and he's going to introduce himself, and you'll learn more about what he does.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for the introduction. Thank you to Chesterfield Democrats for having me today. Thank you everyone who is on the call today and watching live, and also watching the recorded stream as well. Like Maureen said, my name is Connor Auchi. I'm the regional organizing director for Show Me Change, which is the Missouri Democratic Coordinated Campaign this year. And my region is the 2nd Congressional District. We are the organizing program for Democrats up and down the tick this year, from Nicole Galloway for governor down to state house, and we're working really hard to deliver the change that I think Missourians need and Missourians want this year, and we're really excited to do that. We'll be making calls, we'll be making texts, we'll be relationally organizing, all the ways we can talk to people and still be COVID safe we're going to do, and we're going to turn over every stone and find every voter that we can this year. So we're really excited. Right now, we're in the process of hiring our organizers and also reaching out to people in the community who have been involved on campaigns before and are looking to get involved this year. My email is currently, I think, in my Zoom name right now. It's cochi@showmechange.org. If you're interested in getting involved this year with a coordinated campaign, I am more than happy to talk to you. Please shoot me an email at that address, and I'd be happy for us to set up a one-on-one to talk over the phone or over a video chat. So thanks again so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you the next couple of months to deliver the change we need here in Missouri. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Connor. That was great. So now just a quick note that the chat is disabled so that it makes it easier to submit questions and answers. And Brian will field those as they come in, and we'll ask Jo when she's done with her talk. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Jo Manning to you, our guest for this evening. Jo has been covering Missouri politics and government for more than 4 decades, much of that time as a reporter and columnist at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and most recently at St. Louis Public Radio. She was the first woman to cover the St. Louis City Hall from 1978 to 81, and was the newspaper's second woman sports writer in history. She spent almost 4 years there from 1981 to 85 in the Post-Dispatch Washington Bureau. She was the newspaper's primary St. Louis-based political reporter from 1990 through 2008, when she became one of the staff members who took retirement buyouts. In 2009, she joined an online news operation called the St. Louis Beacon that was founded by some of the former St. Louis Post-Dispatch editors and writers. In 2013, the Beacon merged with St. Louis Public Radio, where Jo was senior political reporter until her retirement in March of 2019. She has continued to do some part-time work for the station. Known for her excellence in bipartisan reporting, Ms. Manning has won a number of local, regional, and national awards over the course of her career. So welcome, Jo, and we are looking forward to what you have to say.
Well, thanks for having me. As I said, nothing is more humbling than your Zoom. When you're looking at the Zoom and you realize you really do look as old as you feel sometimes. And but so I am thrilled to be here. I do continue to do some talks to different groups. I want to emphasize I am not taking sides as far as parties, as far as professionally, because I still do some political coverage and analysis. So I see my contribution, whatever it is to be honest. So I try to be pretty straightforward about how I see things, and I may be accurate or I may be off, but it's as I see it, looking at it based on the 40 plus years that I spent covering politics, most of it in St. Louis or in Washington on behalf of St. Louis. I'll try to leave a lot of time for questions and comments, because I don't think you want to hear me just drone on for 40 minutes, although I can do that. Okay, first we look at what happened on the primary just a week ago. Sam Page won the Democratic nomination for county executive. Page has been in the job since Steve Stinger was forced to resign because he was convicted of several misdeeds. Page had been the county council president before then. And many Democratic activists know that Page had run for lieutenant governor and later for the state senate, both unsuccessfully earlier. I think that Page's victory in the primary, I sort of expected it because he had 2 major primary opponents. If he only had one, it's potential that Page might not have won. Although some people disagree with me on this, the way I see it is generally an incumbent, if they don't get a majority of the vote in something, the people who voted against the incumbent, if they split their vote among other candidates, even if one of those candidates wasn't running, I would surmise that a majority of those people who would have had to move their vote somewhere else or not vote would probably not vote for the incumbent, because if they were supportive of the incumbent, they would have voted for them to begin with. That's just my theory. And again, it has nothing to do with, excuse me, who the candidate is. It's just when you look at the record the record of elections, that's usually what happens. So Page, I think, benefited from the fact that his opposition was split. I think, though, that Page's election could probably be credited largely to what is perceived as a success story so far of his handling of the pandemic. Page and St. Louis Mayor Lyda Krewson have worked together and have had stricter mandates on the public than the state of Missouri. But for various reasons, some of which I think were political, Governor Mike Parson has opted to just let the city and the county, and also in Kansas City, has allowed them to have stricter restrictions than he has imposed on the state. He has opted not to follow the model of the governor of Georgia, for example, who has been at war with various large municipalities in Georgia, notably Atlanta, who have been trying to get more restrictions such as mask requirements, and the governor has blocked it. I think Parson, smartly from a political standpoint, has opted to let the St. Louis and Kansas City sort of go their own way. The reason I'm mentioning that is because I think this plays into what you may see in the coming months. I suspect that the pandemic, the virus, will probably get worse in the next couple months leading up to November 3rd. And how it's handled in St. Louis and St. Louis County and Kansas City, I think is going to affect voter turnout and how voters vote. And this is particularly important for Democrats because all of you know, Democrats, the Democratic support is largely in urban and the suburbs. Democratic support in rural Missouri has been lagging for a couple decades now. So without getting into the whys, the point is that leading into this November, what's going to be extremely important for urban and suburban Democrats on both sides of the state is to figure out how best to get their voters out, either physically or through mail-in ballots, how much cooperation they're going to get from election authorities in those jurisdictions, and following through. Standing around saying, well, hopefully we'll get our people out in November is not going to work this time for the Democrats. It won't work for the Republicans either, but they have different challenges, and I'm not going to bore you with all those. But my point being is that for the Democrats, the expected rise in the pandemic, as people get the flu, people are indoors more. I think that how Page handles it, Page and Cruzen, but especially Page, is going to affect Democrats up and down the ballot. So if people have to wear masks, if they are getting used to wearing masks, if there's other things that need to be done to try to reduce the contagion, if that is successful, I think that could help Democrats on the ballot. If it's not successful, and let's say St. Louis County, and Kansas City get hit with heavy blowback from the virus, I think that is going to be very difficult for Democrats to win key races. In part because if people are afraid to go out, or if they're sick, or if they're dying, it's hard to get those people to vote. So I think people who have been trivializing the virus, it's been bad enough the last few months. And part of this, I mean, as an older woman myself, I've been paying with health issues. I have asthma. I have been paying close attention to this. And I think that people in some ways have been downplaying the impact it's going to have on the ballot and who votes, when people vote. And so it's going to be incumbent in both parties to make sure that they get their votes. And if that means organizing, making sure there's ballot boxes where people can return their vote, or sending out mailers reminding people that they can vote absentee because of the, in effect, the waiver that the General Assembly and the governor has allowed for this year, so people can vote because of concerns about COVID. I think how the voters respond to that is going to have a big impact on who wins or who loses in November in Missouri. And I think that you can't downplay that. Maybe some people may think I'm overreacting to this. I don't think so. This is one of the things where I feel confident, sadly, that this virus is, the chances of it being less worse in the next couple months than it is now, I think are pretty slim. Even though in the St. Louis area, it looks like the number of new cases and the number of hospitalizations have gotten more stable. And it looks like they may have started to get a handle on it, in part because more mask wearing. Once the fall hits, once more kids are in school or in college, and it's not just the people who are in the educational settings, but the relatives of those people, wherever they go, if they go to the store or whatever, if they infect others. I think this is going to have a bigger impact on what happens on November 3rd in Missouri and other states than some people may want to believe or entertain. But I think that for both parties to glibly just kind of sit back and say, we'll kind of see what happens, I think that's dangerous. And not just for health reasons, it's political reasons, when you're looking at it. And I would say that to either party. Again, the Republicans have different challenges because they are really depending on a strong rural turnout. And if rural voters aren't getting to the polls, or if there's a problem getting their mail-in ballots and getting their mail-in ballots sent in to be counted, they're going to have a similar problem to Democrats, but for different reasons. So that's my short-term assessment. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because I think that the fact that Page won the nomination will mean that pretty much the St. Louis area's policy towards addressing the pandemic, while it may get stricter, won't change that much because we have the same chief executive dealing with it. So, and I think for the Shoup Wagner campaigns, this is going to be a big issue as things heightened in their races. I thought it was interesting. I got a mailer at my house just a day or two ago from Wagner's camp, where she was promoting her stance on healthcare. Now, granted, Democrats, counter that, well, she has supported the Republican efforts to get rid of Obamacare, but she shrewdly has put an early mailer out where she's trying to not inoculate herself by saying she's very concerned about healthcare. She's concerned about the elderly. She's concerned about protecting Medicare. And whether Democrats agree or disagree on that, the point is that Wagner is already trying to inoculate herself from likely Shoup attacks on that issue. As healthcare was, I would argue, the biggest issue in 2018. I think in Missouri anyway, I think it stands to probably be the biggest issue again in 2020, largely because of the pandemic has made people even more concerned about it and thinking about it. If they've lost their job, do they have insurance? Do they not have insurance? Where can they get it? They're going to be paying more attention to what's going to be happening in the courts with Obamacare. I think that's why President Trump brought up this issue the last couple of days, saying he's going to try to issue an executive order to require insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions, which is kind of strange when the administration's in court trying to toss out Obamacare, including the protections for pre-existing conditions. And he said over the weekend that, well, he just wanted to double down on that issue. I think it's because Republicans see that as a really dangerous stance for them, that voters are getting more and more concerned about that. And you have swing voters in particular who maybe that's probably a key reason why Biden has the large lead nationally. Now in Missouri, as the Democrats, I think even the Chesterfield Democrats would acknowledge, the chances of Biden carrying the state are slim. I'm not saying it can't happen, but in 2008, I watched the Obama campaign do a full court press to try to carry Missouri. And Missouri ended up being the only swing state in 2008 that did not go with Obama, narrowly went for McCain. And then in 2012, Obama and Romney were in the state, but only to raise money. Neither of them did hardly any major public events in 2012. They focused on other states. They were just in the St. Louis area to collect money from major donors of both parties who live here. So then 2016, you saw the collapse of in effect, the collapse of the Democratic Party in Missouri for a number of reasons. And partly because I think, without getting into the details, the Clinton campaign opted not to campaign here at all. And so she was getting defined negatively in Missouri. And Jason Kander and Chris Koster, the candidates for the US Senate and governor, while both of them ran very vigorous campaigns, weren't able to counter that. Once they could see that Trump was going to win by more than, let's say, 10 or 12 points, I think they knew that their chances of victory were slim. If Trump had only carried the state by 12 points, as Romney did in 2012, we'd be talking about Senator Kander and Governor Koster right now. And whether, what Koster was going to do to help beef up the party. Obviously, none of that happened. So I think I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I'm trying to be honest. This is sort of, I think, the climate that Democrats in Missouri face. Now, again, there are these islands of opportunity, and the 2nd Congressional District is arguably the biggest. Ann Wagner, who I've known for decades, I think she was pretty unsettled by just narrowly beating her Democratic rival. This time she has a better known Democratic rival, Jill Shoup, and Shoup also has been known for being a strong money raiser and knowing how to run a campaign. I mean, Shoup's Senate contests, particularly when she defeated Jay Ashcroft, were a lot of money involved. She really got a lot of people out. And granted, since her state Senate district didn't take all of the 2nd district, it was part of it. And it kind of, I think, is sort of a template with how she's approaching her campaign this time. A lot of Shoup's fortunes will likely depend on how strong St. Charles area comes out, that part that is in the 2nd district, and whether or not they're strongly for Wagner or if they split their votes. I mean, there is a lot of labor folks who live in the St. Charles area in the 2nd district, in that edge of the district. Will they vote Republican and go with Trump, as some have done in the past, or will they decide to go with Shoup, regardless of what they do at the top? I think Biden will not be the drag on the ticket that Hillary Clinton was in 2016. I'm not saying it was fair or unfair. I'm just saying it was a fact. I mean, we can debate all night on whether it was fair or what happened to her, or whether or not the wrong issues were emphasized, but that's over and done. But at least at this point, which is less than 100 days before the November 3rd election, Biden is in stronger shape in Missouri than Hillary Clinton. And while I would be shocked if he was able to bolster that and win, he could, but bolster that and win, it does mean that if his percentage loss is low enough, let's say in the single digits, let's say 5%, that could help Democrats. It could help. It may make the difference for Nicole Galloway, depending on whether or not her campaign gets stronger, how Mike Parson, if his campaign really catches on. I mean, right now, a lot of things are, partisan, where they each have their bases of support. Is Parson successful in peeling off a lot of suburban votes? Does Galloway fail to catch fire among urban Democrats that she's going to need in big numbers? But do they come out anyway for Biden and Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris's selection today, which I was not surprised by, but it provides some opportunities, but also some challenges for Democrats. She, is obviously very skilled. She's considered one of the better speakers in the U.S. Senate. She's very quick on her feet. She made a name for herself during the Kavanaugh hearings. And as far as Republicans bothered them, but obviously Democrats were pleased, she's not afraid to go for the jugular, which she even did against Biden in one of the primaries earlier this year. So it's, in some ways, he's picked what traditionally presidential candidates often do. They pick somebody who they think can be tougher on the opposing side than they can be, either because of personality or maybe being quicker on their feet. She's, 20 years, almost 20 years younger than Biden. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how he uses Harris. Is she used the way Bob Dole was used decades ago when he was the attack dog for the Republicans, when he was the VP nominee way back when? Or is she used more the way Tim Kaine was used by Hillary Clinton in 2016? And some would say that while Kaine is very highly respected within the party, he didn't garner a lot of enthusiasm and maybe didn't help strengthen some of Hillary Clinton's weaknesses the way I think Biden is hoping that Kamala Harris does. Now, she will, I think, definitely ignite a lot of support among African-American women. I think some progressives are wary of her because of her past as a prosecutor. And I think Republicans are going to try to exploit that. But I thought it was interesting that already there's some Republican t-shirt that came out that says Kamala is a cop. And I wasn't sure if that would be a powerful message to get people not to vote for her. I think for people in the middle, and granted, with the protests over the George Floyd murder, there's all of that going on. But the people in the middle who sympathize with the protesters but don't want things to go out of control, would the fact that they see Kamala Harris as being someone who's been involved in law enforcement, but who also has pushed for some reforms, is she going to represent the middle ground that could help Biden, who has taken some hits because of his support for the crime bill in the 1990s that has had some flaws in it that some believe has made things worse for people who are accused of crimes. So that's sort of my backdrop right now. I would like to entertain some questions first before I go any further. So who is moderating the questions so I can get a sense of what you'd like to hear from me and what you don't?
All right, so we've got one question here. Just let me open it up. We'd like to have you, Betsy would like to have you address the absentee mail-in voter influence on the general election.
Well, as I mentioned a little earlier when I talked about Paige, I think it's going to be a major deal. Now, for Democrats, what Democrats have to do, traditionally in the past, Democrats have often, organized on absentees, but they would be doing stuff in the last month. Let's say in October, you'd have phone banks. I remember in 2008, in particular, the Obama campaign and the coordinated Democratic campaign in the state, they had phone banks trying to get people to either, if they needed an absentee ballot, helping them get them. Frankly, Democrats need to be doing that in September. Because if there ends up being more mail problems, if the post office has even additional problems because of the changes that are being made that some critics say are intended to make the post office less able to timely distribute mail, timely send out ballots, and timely get them back. It's going to be key for both parties to get their mail-in ballots in early, as soon as it's legally possible for people to start voting absentee. In Missouri, it's a little more complicated because we don't have no fault voting, but it means that I think both parties, whatever they used to do in October, they probably need to move it up to September. They have to do calls, or most of them have lists of who's been getting absentee ballots in the past, making sure that they get them this time. There's going to be a lot more. Actually, I was somewhat impressed with how St. Louis County handled the huge influx of absentee ballots this time in the August primary. It didn't really slow things down that much as far as collecting them, as far as tabulating them on election day. I think that in some contests, because of the volume, probably in both parties, that it could slow down who's going to be a winner or loser in certain contests. I'm thinking the 2nd district, particularly if it ends up being close. But I think that that whole situation with absentee ballots in Missouri is going to be very important for both parties. And I'm assuming the Republican Party in the state, frankly, tends to be extremely organized. And I would assume that they're already figuring out what they need to do to make sure that their base gets the ballots and gets them in. Democrats who, as a rule, and I don't mean this as an insult, but just quoting Will Rogers, it's like from 80 years ago, it's like herding cats. Democrats are going to have to do the same and make sure they move quickly and not wait until the last couple of weeks in October to get all their ballots out and get them back, because it could end up where they're in piles and maybe don't get back to the election board on time. I think it's going to be a major issue, especially if the post office, the financial problems and the organizational problems, and the fact that the president is pretty much against a lot of vote by mail. I think there's going to be efforts to try to slow it down in a number of states. So in Missouri, I think it's going to be a challenge for both parties because, as I've said many times, both parties rely on absentee ballots in the state. It's just for different reasons.
As I was listening to you, I happened to think of a question myself. What do you think the Republicans are going to be doing versus what you think Democrats could? You're saying that we need to start in September, but what would that actually look like in your mind? What would that need to look like starting in September?
Well, I think for both parties, it's a matter of not only sending out flyers or whatever they normally would do to try to get people to pay attention how to vote, phone banks, which have often been a major thing for both parties. I think, but my point is they're going to have to do it earlier as far as the absentee ballots. We don't know how many polling places there's going to be on election day, in part because the older poll workers who frankly have manned the polls for decades, many of them are not going out because they don't want to endanger their health. So St. Louis County, for example, did reduce the number of polling places in August. Now, ramp this up. Here you had turnout roughly statewide under a third, okay? Under 30%, roughly or so, statewide. Maybe a little higher in the St. Louis area. Okay, triple that at least for November, because we generally have turnouts in the 60 or 70% range in November. So all of a sudden, the county election board is going to be dealing with 2 or 3 times as many ballots. That's true elsewhere as well, but in St. Louis County, you're talking about volume. You know, I mean, St. Louis County has roughly 600,000 registered voters, 650, somewhere in there. And so if you think that, let's say 60 or 70% of them are going to want to vote absentee, that's multiple times what the old numbers used to be for presidential election years. So I think that that's going to be the challenge for both parties, as I mentioned. I don't want to repeat myself too much. And for Republicans, it's the rural areas, which are farther spread out. The circuit clerks run the elections in those counties. Okay, there's fewer people, but still they run into the same challenge. They may not have that many polling places in November. People may be afraid to travel, and they got to get those absentee ballots out. The Republicans have had phone banks, I'm talking previously, that often, call the people. They have the voter lists of who selects absentee ballots. And granted, technically, we don't know how people vote. The conventional wisdom is the majority of those who cast ballot in rural Missouri are voting for Republicans, and a majority of those who vote in city of St. Louis vote for Democrats, and in St. Louis County, Warren County, St. Charles County, it varies, Franklin County, but the both parties, I think, will be needing to do phone banking, sending out flyers. Normally, I'd say people go door to door, but I think during the pandemic, you're not going to have too much of that. So people are going to have to double down. Social media, if you're trying to reach younger people, a lot more stuff on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, other places to get people energized and to emphasize your message that they need to get their ballots early and they need to send them in early as soon as they can. And I think that frankly, the party that is most successful in that will be the party that has the most victories on November 3rd in Missouri.
And then taking that one step further, we have a question from Kathy Merrick as to how do you think that the fact that all registered voters will receive an application for a mail-in ballot will affect the number of people who vote by mail or in person? And then, of course, we have the notary requirement that's going to make things difficult as well.
Well, the notary requirement, as you know, if people are, that's only, all right, if you don't go to a poll early and cast, an early ballot saying, because I'm not going to be here. Otherwise, you do have notarized requirements, but not for the health reasons. And there is an exception also for the people who are concerned about getting COVID, whether they have it or not, or are a caregiver or not. The notary requirement is waived for those people. I'm suspecting that the majority of people who vote absentee in the state this time will check that box so they don't have to have it notarized. But I think that some people getting that message out is also important for both sides, and explaining that, okay, if you're going to be voting because you say you're going to be out of town, you are going to need a notary unless you show up at the election board or the satellite offices, or let's say, the circuit clerk's office, when they start having voting. It's usually like a month to 6 weeks before the election. So you can vote an absentee ballot live, and in those cases. But again, they could be dealing with lines at the polls. There weren't that many lines early, at least in the St. Louis area. My husband, for example, voted live absentee, and like the first or second day, he went to the South County election satellite office, and there was nobody there. There was 8 staff members, and he was able to get in and out in a couple minutes. Now, he was early, but for the general election, the presidential election, I'm envisioning, if you may recall, in 2008 in particular, there were lines, and in 2018, although smaller, but there were lines out the door, in the parking lots, around the street. Well, with the virus spreading, and as I mentioned before, I predict it's going to be worse by then, people may be afraid to do that. So it's going to be up to the parties to make sure that they they won't be able to just contact the sure things saying, well, I know this person's going to vote Democratic, so I'll call them. You can't do that. They're going to have to vote. I mean, the parties, both parties are going to having to be reaching out to everybody that they can in order to glean as many votes as they can. And this, and absentee ballots are going to be key. As I mentioned before, I think the party that's most successful in getting their people and in getting the independents who may normally not vote absentee, to get those people to vote and get those ballots in so they're counted is going to be, that's going to be the key work requirement for both parties, and the party that's most successful, I predict, will win.
That all makes sense. It really does. We have a question regarding the primary from Al Gerber. Was there a lot of crossover of Republicans to vote for Mantovani in Town and Country, Frontenac, De Pere? Democrats got twice as many ballots or votes as Republicans. And I actually noticed that myself, and I wondered if we got more votes because too many people took Democratic ballots. What was your take on that?
Well, I was looking at the numbers as well. It's unclear because since people don't register by party in Missouri, you have to guess. I would say there was some crossover. Obviously not enough. I wasn't sure. After what happened in 2018, frankly, when Wesley Bell knocked off Bob McCullough, who had been, until Ferguson, arguably one of the most popular Democratic office holders in the region. McCullough, I think, he didn't even have a Republican opponent. So there was some suspicion that Republicans would cross over to vote for him. Why do you think they didn't know he was in trouble until it was too late to do so? So that was 2018. So I was wondering whether or not crossovers would be much of a factor this time after it wasn't in 2018. I think there was some, but obviously the fact that Page was able to fend off all that wasn't enough. And it may get Republicans to rethink their strategy the last few cycles of backing a Democrat in the primary rather than getting their own candidate in the primary who then can challenge the Democratic winner in the general election. I mean, Page, he's going to face some Republican opposition in November, but it's not going to be much. So nobody really well known. So I think that I think Republicans may be recalibrating for the future how they approach this whole crossover thing. Because if it wasn't successful this time for Mantovani, and it basically gives Page a free ride for November, they may be trying to reconsider that for 2 years from now when he has to run again, if he decides to run again, or whoever the Democratic, major Democratic nominee is for county executive. I think that crossovers were often a big deal in the city of St. Louis in mayoral contests. I mean, especially in the 90s. I remember that vividly. I covered some of that. But I'm not sure, looking at the numbers this time, I just don't see where it's going to be, where it was a huge factor. And statewide, about 20% more Republicans took Republican ballots than Democrats, which, while technically that doesn't necessarily mean anything towards November, I think it does signal which party maybe has more enthusiasm. So if I was a Democrat in Missouri, a Democratic leader, I'd be concerned about that, because it means that even with whatever perceived crossover there was in St. Louis County, more Republicans went to the polls on August 4th than Republicans. That tells you something. And that I think if I was a Democratic leader in the state, I'd be concerned about that. Go way back to 1992, for example, which ended up being a huge Democratic year. I'll never forget the primary. And of course, we had this crowd of people running for governor in both parties. But what was interesting to me at the time, and this was one of my first major contests, was the 1992 governor's race, which I covered from start to finish. And plus, we had all this presidential interest. Bill Clinton and Al Gore were here all the time for the general. But in the primary, what Republicans were calling me the next day and pointing out that the Democratic turnout statewide was so much larger. Huge, huge. In fact, Vince Shamel, who was creamed in his bid for governor, losing badly to Mel Carnahan, Vince Shamel got more votes than any of the three major Republicans running for governor on the Republican side. And so when you added up Shamel and Carnahan's tally, I had a lot of Republicans calling me that I remember the day after the election, because I ended up writing about it, saying that they thought it didn't look good for November. And they were right. It didn't look good for them in November in Missouri. And, you know, this 92 and 96 were sort of the heyday for Democrats in Missouri as far as winning statewide elections, having a presidential candidate who was doing really well and carried the state. I mean, because that 96 was the last time a Democratic presidential candidate carried the state. So I sort of meandered here, but I'm trying to point out that I think that worrying about the crossover, it wasn't as big a factor as people think. And if I was a Democratic operative in the state, I'd be looking more at the fact that even with all that, Republicans cast more ballots in the primary than Democrats did. But conversely, what you look at is how Amendment 2 passed despite that. And if you look at the map of how Amendment 2 won, this is the Medicaid expansion. Excuse me if I'm using the wrong number, but how a Medicaid expansion passed, it got huge majorities in the city and county in Kansas City and St. Louis. But as the 2018 election can show, that doesn't help you win statewide. You can just ask Claire McCaskill about that. She still lost by several percentage points statewide, even though she had huge turnout in St. Louis County, particularly in the 2nd district because of Court Van Ostren's help in getting more Democrats out. But when you look at what is happening this time, I think that what Democrats need to do is look at how the Medicaid expansion peeled off small percentages from each of the rural counties, not much. And in fact, if this had been a candidate, traditionally a Democrat, if they get under 30% in the rural areas, their goose is cooked. Well, Medicaid expansion did that, but it won anyway. Why? Because it managed to win in Springfield, St. Charles County. I mean, if you look at the map of how Medicaid expansion won, if I was a Democrat, I would be running statewide or promoting a like-minded ballot issue. I would be looking at that map as a template on how you can win in November, but you're going to have to replicate that.
Well, in talking about the history of the party back in the 90s and so on, this next question is very relevant from Sue McCool. She asks, what does your experience tell you about what moves the Missouri voter from left to right in the past 40 years?
Well, what's interesting is that for whatever reason, and I'm not going to get into why, but the Democratic brand has been sorely damaged in the state. From the standpoint, if you look at the ballot issues, like I said, like Medicaid expansion passed, which was mainly backed by Democrats as far as in the General Assembly. Republicans have blocked it for a decade. You look at the other, like Clean Missouri, which passed a couple years ago. Marijuana legalization, at least partially, for certain things passed. When you look at, and then you look a few years ago, the minimum wage hikes passed. If you look at the ballot measures that pass in the state, they're actually quite progressive. But
Joe, can
the
you hear
voters
us?
are voting for progressive
Have you
issues.
got you frozen
But
on the
when it
screen?
comes to voting for candidates, the majority of them vote for Republicans, even if those Republicans oppose the ballot measures that they're voting for. Now that tells you that the Democratic Party in Missouri has a branding problem, and they got to figure out how to fix that.
That's a good question. Is that, how do you fix it? It's a big question.
Yeah, well, they said I've
I'm look,
got
I'm
my
looking-
ideas, but I'm, not going to get into that. I mean, that's up to you guys to decide. But I'm just saying, looking at it dispassionately, that's the issue, is that even if Democrats are backing an issue, that doesn't dissuade voters from supporting it. But at the same time, when they're looking at whether somebody has a D or R in their name, and they prefer the Republicans. Now, for Democrats, some would say that the Medicaid expansion success proves that they need to worry less about trying to bolster their numbers in rural Missouri and more about bolstering their numbers in suburban Missouri. Because the suburbs determine who wins statewide anyway. And let's put it this way, if you look at the Medicaid expansion tally, as I mentioned, that it carried Springfield, it carried St. Charles County. I can't imagine a Democrat doing that, but a Democrat could if they have the right message or the right campaign or figure out how to get voters to back them. I mean, one of the theories, frankly, going back in time, behind, having Chris Koster as the Democratic nominee for governor was because he was a former Republican, and the view was that maybe he would bring these swing, middle of the road Democrats, the moderate Democrats who might be appalled by some of the conservative Democratic views. The view was that maybe he could peel some of them off. Well, he couldn't. I mean, he got within 5 points. Again, a lot of it was because the huge Trump wave. But my point is that, but at the same time, on that same ballot were some progressive issues that did win. So I think that it's a dilemma that Democrats in Missouri are going to have to deal with and have to figure out how to change that. And until they do, you're going to continue to have problems winning statewide elections. And I think that also creates problems for the Democrats in getting strong down ballot candidates. Since 2012, as a bloc, the Democratic statewide ticket in Missouri hasn't been that, as far as well-known candidates, has not been that strong. I'm not saying it's good or bad or the candidates were good or bad. I'm just saying, looking at it, dispassionately, you look at the qualifications, the name power, the money raising expertise, the Democratic ticket statewide from top to bottom in 2008 and go to 2016, and it's a world of difference. And I think you're running into the same problem this time.
Well, that leads me to a question. I don't have the exact wording that came in when the person registered, about what you kind of think about the Nicole Galloway and Shoup races. Will they have enough money? Are they building enough excitement, enthusiasm?
Well, I think, it's going to depend going forward what they do. I think Galloway's challenge is particularly difficult because she doesn't have that many well-known Democrats running statewide below her. So will she be out campaigning with the rest of the ticket? I mean, Mel Carnahan, after the primary, he put the whole ticket on a small plane, and they flew all, I mean, now it can be scary, but they flew all over the state together, in part so that the lesser known ones, Judy Moriarty, for example, who had problems later, but at the time she was a surprise winner for the Secretary of State nomination, and Carnahan, rather than just distancing themselves from her, put her on the plane with the rest of them, and they were promoting the whole ticket because his view was that if you promote the whole ticket, somebody's going to find some candidate that they really like, and that helps everybody.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think Galloway has any plans on doing that, and I don't know if in the 2020 if that would even help. But I think she does have challenges. She's going to have to get strong urban support. Now, what may help her is the fact, as I just said, since Biden did select a Black woman, Kamala Harris, and the fact that she is, she's also Asian American, that how much excitement she generates in the African American community. Will that translate if they vote, either absentee or live? Will they then be going down the ballot, and will they vote for Galloway as well? So that, again, is where the party apparatus kicks in, and that's where both parties have to start work much earlier than what they're traditionally used to. I mean, often both parties take August off, the rest of August off after the primary, and they either go on, either their candidates go on vacation or they do some money raising, but it's not really high profile till after Labor Day. I think this time, especially with the pandemic, I think that's stupid for either party to do that. They need to be hustling now, because I think by October, you don't know what the climate's going to be like in October health-wise. So you've got to make sure that you've got everything geared towards getting your people out, getting those absentee ballots out, getting them back in. This is 2020 is a very, very, very different type of campaign year. You're not going to have candidates flying all over the state. They're going to be doing Zoom stuff like this, or doing more TV commercials. You're not going to have appearances by Biden and Kamala Harris, let's say in Forest Park, where they attract a bunch of crowds. I mean, I've covered so many presidential races over the years. Many of you may remember the huge crowd on the arch that came out for Barack Obama. You're not going to have anything like this time. Biden can't be doing that. It's too risky health-wise. And same for Trump, you know, who thrives on crowds and who often gets good crowds in Missouri. That's probably scary. Aside from the fact that he may want them, the party leaders want to make sure that their voters stay healthy so they can vote. So, so 2020 is a whole different, I mean, it's a whole different ballgame,
One of our people, to circle back about the difficulty of voting and things, Brenda Otterson, because of the significant decrease in the number of poll sites for August, the poll site where I was a poll manager had long lines for much of the day. Is there a plan to deal with the large turnout that is usual for a presidential election? And should there be a plan to try to deal with these long lines?
There should be a plan. Absolutely. There should be a plan. And if there isn't, that's not good, because you're going to have the longer lines are in the urban and suburban areas. And looking at it from a partisan standpoint, it's the Democrats who stand to lose if they don't have a good plan for getting their people out and getting them to vote safely and quickly. And having really long lines and few polling places for a presidential election on November 3rd is, aside from the health reasons, it's just politically disastrous. Republicans face a little bit of that in the suburbs, but in the rural parts of the state, they don't really, I mean, they're in the 100+ counties that are small, they don't have lines. People go in and vote. So, but again, you have some people who are going to need to vote absentee, even in rural Missouri. But my point being that Democrats in particular have to have a plan together. And if the Democratic Party isn't working with the election officials and others, just, you know, saying for a nonpartisan standpoint, we've got to have a better system, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, just for our Democrats. If you've got lines, huge lines of people, if you had bad lines on August 4th, multiply that.
Right.
And then if the weather's bad, and if even more important, if the virus is going crazy by October, late October, you're going to have trouble finding poll workers. You're going to have trouble having enough polling locations. And are people going to be willing to stand out in the cold, possibly being infected or infecting people? And especially if things are as bad as some health experts predict they could be by then. So, I mean, the challenge, both parties face the challenge, but I think it's particularly crucial just from a political standpoint for Democrats.
Right, that makes sense. It does. From Kathy Merrick, she wondered if you had any insight into the possible success of the CLU case, which, if we won, would allow anyone to cast a ballot due to the fear of COVID without a notarization.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? I didn't catch.
Okay. Do you have any insight into the possible success of the ACL case? They sued about the notary, and I think it's gone back to the back. I'm not sure. I don't want to state something that I'm not positive of, but it's still in litigation, and it would allow anyone to cast a ballot due to fear of COVID without getting it notarized. Right now, they have to be notarized.
Well, not in Missouri. The provision in Missouri for if you check that box that you're either, that's COVID related, you don't need a notary. Unless I'm wrong about this, I don't think so.
There's so much confusion on.
But you had to be over 65. Now, okay, wait.
Yeah, if you're under 65.
I've got to add that.
Right.
Sorry, brain dead.
Okay, there's a lot.
If you're under 65, you do need a notary. That's
Correct.
true. So I think that the issue with that lawsuit is whether or not it's resolved soon enough to make any difference on November 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that either party can sit back and rely on what they hope happens in court to either make it easier or not for people to vote because of COVID concerns. Sorry, I was brain dead. All of a sudden, yeah, right. You do need a notary if you're
Right.
under 65. Since I'm over 65, sometimes you forgot that for a second. But I know, like my church, for example, has been lining up notaries who actually were in the parking lot of our church several days so people could drive through and get their ballots notarized. And they had some people that a bunch of volunteer notaries. And I think there could be that for the Democrats in particular, again, because they're the ones who stand to suffer the most because their voters reside more closely together in the urban and near suburbs. For Democrats, that might be something that the activists need to do, is line up a bunch of notaries. And early on, as soon as absentee balloting starts, which is what, the end of September, they have these parking lot events or whatever. So people who are under 65 can drive in, get it notarized, get it in a ballot box or in the mailbox and go. And I apologize for not emphasizing that earlier, but that will be a key thing that Republicans have to deal with this too, but it's going to be a major issue for Democrats.
It is.
Because of what I just said.
In fact, Michael Bleich just commented, why don't we get some roving notary publics to visit neighborhoods and just go through the neighborhoods? But I think that's it's hard because then you're doing people contact, I think, but I think it's a great idea.
Right. I mean, what you might want, again, is I think the parking lot thing was smart because at least people were in their cars.
Yes.
But again, you got to start doing that early in order to make sure you get the ballots out and get them in. but I think that something like that, or if you set up vans, let's say in certain neighborhoods, and say there's notaries there, and yeah, they're going to be there from such and such a time, and do that regularly, that might be one way. Because while you don't want to be encouraging people being in line, there's probably it's still going to be safer than lines blocks and blocks long on November 3rd.
And I am in quite a few groups, like Clayton Huddles, for example, is very active, and they're actively recruiting people to be notaries. And then I've heard that the libraries are going to have notaries there. So there's a lot of good ideas floating around. If we can just get them, implemented in time, I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, and I said, you can't be waiting around till the middle of October to do this.
No.
You got to have this in place so you guys can start doing this.
So someone's asked down here, Ellen here, and somebody's going to have to tell me the time because I don't see it on my screen, but Ellen is asking, could you give us ideas on how the Democrats could change their branding? What do you think?
I don't think that my opinion is really worth much on that. I mean, all I can do is just say, no, really, because I'm not, a consultant. I'm just let's put this way, I'm analyzing it. And I think there's different reasons why the branding's bad. And some of the branding, it may not be fair. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying it is. And but I think part of it may be the Democrats have not been successful in getting their part of their message out, as far as workers' rights or whatever. But Republicans have done a better job of branding the Democrats, as being, crazy socialists who support abortion, hate cops. I mean, I'm just saying this is the kind of litany of stuff they do. And they tend to be pretty good at it. Whether one agrees or disagrees with them, I'm not saying. I'm just saying, I'm just looking at the bottom line here. But I think Democrats have to do a better job of countering that. If they, as I mentioned minutes ago, you're much more successful at getting your issues passed than you are getting your people passed. And until you figure out how to change that, Democrats are going to be in a big minority in the state, as far as office holders.
So I'm not so sure. I'm looking to see if we've got any more questions here, because we're just about ready to run out of time.
Sure.
Just give a little minute here if somebody else has one more question.
Am I providing what you want to know? I mean, I'm not going to tailor my answers to what you want to hear, but I just want to make sure that I'm providing stuff that's interesting in what you want to know.
I think your value is your depth of knowledge and willing to be bipartisan, and almost like sitting down at dinner with a really trusted, knowledgeable friend and say, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? So I think you've been extremely valuable.
And it doesn't mean, I mean, this is just some old lady, that's me talking about this stuff.
Knowledgeable.
But it doesn't mean that my opinions are any better than anybody else's, other than I've been around a long time covering politics for a long time. But that may or may not be useful. I mean, I'm just...
history is always useful. It's always...
Yes, and people who do not pay attention to history, they repeat it. I will say that.
Yes.
Human beings are great at repeating.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I hear stuff on the news where people say, oh, well, in the 60s, it was different. These are younger commentators. They go, well, in the 60s, it was much more civil when they talked about civil rights. This is something that came up. And I'm like, what?
I was going to say, what?
I know. What are you talking about? And, it was very, passionate, violent. We had a number of assassinations, excuse me.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, this year, while it's passionate, it's nothing like the 60s.
I agree.
But it's because you're old, and there's some of us who are still alive and haven't been defeated, haven't been downed by COVID, who can tell people that. I mean, that's why it does bother me when some people talk about, well, it's just the old people who get knocked off. Well, the old people know a lot of stuff. Not necessarily me necessarily, but old people as a block do. And when you're younger, you often think you know a lot of stuff. And then when you're about 35, you realize you don't. At least that's
right.
what happened with me.
That's right. Well,
Maureen, this is Brian. Maureen,
Yes.
this is Brian, one of the hosts. And there are a couple more questions. One of them is from John and says that considering Biden-Harris, if Biden chooses not to run for re-election in 2024 and Harris runs to fill that vacancy, what will that look like? Or what dynamics, I think, beyond that, will she be running the entire time, kind of thing? Maybe I'm adding to it. Sorry about that, John.
Well, I think, I don't want to get too much in the weeds because frankly, Democrats are great at planning well, way ahead and forgetting what's right in front of them. I mean, you got to get through 2020 and get them elected. If you don't, 2024 doesn't matter. I mean, there's been a few candidates, Richard Nixon's one of them, who lost and came back. But losing vice presidents in particular often, are just in the trash heap of history and their names just come up in trivia contests. I think that it's clear that Kamala Harris is ambitious, but frankly, virtually any vice presidential candidate who's picked is. They're all ambitious. I mean, Biden had already run for president a couple times unsuccessfully when he was picked by Obama. You look back, Clinton Gore, when Bill Clinton picked Al Gore. I remember at the time, a lot of people were like, because Al Gore had run unsuccessfully for president, had been part of this crowd that had started out running. So I think that in some ways it's sort of misogynist and unfair. And I'm not saying that Kamala Harris would be a good or bad president. That's not what I'm saying. My point is to have a different standard for her, saying, well, she's ambitious. I mean, I was surprised that Chris Dodd said such a thing. It's like, well, yeah, they all are. And in fact, the ones who are hungry are more likely to campaign harder for the candidate, who they're on the ticket with. And so I think that Democrats, for good or bad, they need to be focusing on the next, it's less than 100 days now.
Right.
They need to be focusing on November 3rd. And then if Biden, Kamala Harris wins, then Democrats are going to have to be heavily organized and very assertive because there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that the Republicans I predict this, will try to do between November 4th and the inauguration, or at least November 4th and January 3rd. This is assuming if Democrats are successful in regaining control of the Senate and keeping control of the House. Democrats have a whole lot of stuff you guys got to do in less than 100 days. And if you don't do it, it doesn't matter about 2024. Doesn't matter. None of that's going to matter. And I think that, if Biden wins, sure, Harris is going to be paying attention to how things might, play out. But Al Gore was doing that with Bill Clinton in 1999 and 2000. And if you remember, there was all that whole impeachment stuff because of Monica Lewinsky. But as it turned out, Republicans played their hand, and actually Democrats did better in 1998 than most Democrats thought they were going to do. My point being, and I think in some of that case, I think Al Gore goofed by not having more communication with Bill Clinton and knowing kind of what, I'm not saying about his private life, but talking about going forward. I've often believed, looking at this objectively, that a big mistake that Al Gore made in the 2000 election was that even though he didn't want Bill Clinton out and campaigning for him because of the whole stain from his personal misdeeds, even though Bill Clinton was still a popular president because the economy was booming. I think that Al Gore made a big mistake, and he should have told Clinton, okay, go to some urban areas for me and campaign really hard, and go to Arkansas. Spend all your time in Arkansas and try to carry Arkansas for me. Because if Bill Clinton had managed to carry Arkansas for Al Gore, Florida wouldn't have mattered. In fact, Al Gore, he lost Missouri, but not by that much. And in fact, I was at the Post-Dispatch then, and we were doing very vigorous professional polling. And Al Gore was actually winning in our polls to like the last few days, when then things tipped to George W. Bush. And my point being that if Al Gore had carried Missouri or Arkansas or Tennessee, his own state, Florida wouldn't have mattered. So my point being is that Democrats sometimes get caught up in the weeds, or looking at, well, the Republicans are hitting Clinton over his personal misdeeds, which were, legit. But look at the poll numbers. Are there things, the way you can utilize it? And I think that Democrats need to be coldly looking at that now, because that's what Republicans are doing. Regardless of what President Trump's poll standings are, or what the public thinks of him, Republicans, for good or bad, are sticking with him, and they're figuring out how to best utilize his skills, or how to best utilize their skills to be successful on November 3rd. And I think that Democrats need to be doing the same thing, is figuring out, okay, what skills does Biden have? What are his weaknesses that we need to bolster up some other way? I mean, the fact that Hillary Clinton never was in Wisconsin after Labor Day in 2016, that's crazy. And the fact that she apparently wasn't listening to reports that the state Democrats in Pennsylvania were warning her for months that there were some weaknesses as far as enthusiasm, that shouldn't have happened, because she had all this money. That shouldn't have happened. I'm just looking at it strategically, forgetting everything else. And so I think that Democrats getting caught up wondering about 2024, I think that's a waste of time. A waste of time. You're going to have so many, even if Biden wins, you're going to have so many headaches until the inauguration day of 2021. I wouldn't even be thinking about that. You got to survive between now and then and get your people elected, or figure out how to reduce the losses enough to get some of your people elected. Not thinking about name game stuff that you can play around with that over a drink on January 22nd after the inauguration's over. That's just my opinion. I mean,
I think that's a great ending to what's been a wonderful night. I mean, you just did the perfect ending with that question and with your response, that we got to keep our eyes on the prize for November 3rd, and we got a lot of work to do.
And even then, it won't be over.
And it won't be over. Yep. Let's just get to inauguration day, and then we can maybe relax a little then. So if everything goes well.
Yeah, but even then, you have to, hey, look, remember what Obama's approval rating was on election day, on inauguration day in 2009. Now, remember at the time, people were already projecting that Republicans are going to be toast and this and that. And look what happened by 2010.
Oh, yeah. 2010 is all it took. Yeah.
Didn't take much. I remember talking to, interviewing Roy Blunt, who was considering whether to run for the U.S. Senate. And he was pessimistic about his chances in early 2009. He figured Robin Carnahan was going to have be in a much stronger position than he was. By early 2010, that was not the case, and he knew it. And he ended up winning by 14 points, and that took down other people, other Democrats, because Blunt did so well. So my point is that it doesn't take much to change fortunes in politics, and it doesn't take much time.
Well, I have to say you've given us a delightful evening and a lot to think about.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
Oh yeah, this has been delightful, and we really appreciate you taking so much time to spend with us. So thank you to the audience for all the great questions, and we'll go on from there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for asking me. Appreciate it.
Bye now. So long, everybody.